On the eerie night of All Hallows Eve, Steve found himself alone in the dimly lit garden. His tearful gaze, directed at 3 pumpkins, a profound longing, marred his face. And these pumpkins had become an unsettling obsession, enclosed within a small glass house, guarded from the elements. His solitary vigil was interrupted by a rogue soccer ball that careened into his garden. A child emerged from the darkness, offering apologies for the intrusion. In a surreal conversation, the child perceived an uncanny vitality in the pumpkins, a life that seemed far from ordinary. Intrigued, the child inquired about Steve's tears, oblivious to the harrowing narrative awaiting them. Steve, driven by an unshakable compulsion, chose to share his dreadful tale, a story entwining his own cursed past with the inexplicable connection to those pumpkins. The narrative unfurled in a world shrouded in shadows, where an orphaned boy named Steve had found solace in sculpting sinister pumpkin visages. His obsession with Halloween set him apart, but it also made him a target for the cruel taunts of his fellow orphans. It was a life devoid of love, but it was also a life teeming with dreams of Halloween becoming the grandest spectacle of the year. On that fateful Halloween night, as bullies tormented him once more, Steve's desperate pleas reached celestial ears. From the deepest abyss of nightmares, a sinister entity emerged to his aid, vanquishing the bullies and transforming their leader into a malevolent pumpkin. This enigmatic being introduced itself as Hallowmare, a guardian birthed from the abyss of darkness. It offered to protect Steve and turn his Halloween dreams into chilling reality. Henceforth, Hallowmare remained steadfast by Steve's side, granting his wishes and shielding him from harm. As the years passed, Steve grew up, married Suzanne, and began a family of his own. Yet, with the passage of time, his focus shifted from Halloween to the happiness he found with his loved ones. One year, Steve inadvertently neglected to call upon Hallowmare, not out of neglect, but because he discovered contentment in his newfound family life. He sealed the invitation in a box and stowed it away in the attic, bidding what he believed was a farewell to his guardian. A decade later, on Halloween night, Steve's children ventured into the attic and stumbled upon the forgotten invitation. Unwittingly, they invoked Hallowmare, who returned with a sinister agenda to remind Steve of his true family. In an instant, Steve's cherished family was grotesquely transformed into pumpkins, and Hallowmare declared itself as his sole family. It was a dire lesson for Steve to comprehend. The pumpkins served as a ghastly reminder of the curse that now bound Steve to the enigmatic entity. The night was swallowed by darkness, and the 3 pumpkins stared malevolently at Steve, the grim consequence of his choices etched into their eerie expressions. Hallowmare had returned, and with it came a chilling reckoning that would haunt Steve for eternity. As tears welled up in Steve's eyes once more, he came to the disconcerting realization that the true horrors of Halloween were not confined to the realm of the living, but lurked in the shadows, where nightmares breathed life into dreadful reality. When I was just a young child of about 4 or 5, a sinister incident transpired in our family. My great-great-grandmother had passed away, leaving behind an old, grimy mirror that my mother inherited. This mirror, unremarkable in size, bore a menacing crack down its center. After my parents cleaned the accumulated grime from the mirror, they decided to place it in their bedroom. However, as time passed, a sinister undercurrent of dread began to permeate their lives. They experienced nightmarish dreams of shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their room, malevolently draining the life force from their slumbering bodies. To make matters worse, they would wake up with unexplained scratches etched into their backs. In desperation, they summoned my aunt, who was well versed in the dark arts of demonology, to investigate the mirror. She entered the room, extinguished the lights, and snapped a photograph of the mirror. To their horror, the developed picture revealed an abyss of darkness, pierced only by eerie orbs trapped within the mirror's depths. As they gazed at the photo, an ominous black liquid began oozing from the cracked glass. My stepmother, her curiosity piqued, dared to touch the liquid, only to have her fingers seared by an unseen malevolence. Weeks later, my mother was jolted awake by my blood-curdling screams. In a panic, she grabbed a knife and ventured out of her room, only to find me standing near the front door, where an unseen force tugged relentlessly at my small frame. Without thinking, she swung the knife just above my head, causing the entity to release its grip. My mother, trembling with fear, questioned my actions, and all I could utter was, "Mommy couldn't find you." Perplexed, she inquired about my statement, to which I explained that I had peered into her room. But neither she nor my stepmother were present. A malevolent presence had obscured them from my view, the moment I couldn't locate them in their room. My mother wasted no time, and promptly called my aunt to remove the accursed mirror from our home. Strangely, the only memory I retained from that house was our hasty departure, the shattered mirror now a distant, haunting memory on the wall. The sheer terror that I endured on that fateful night at the derelict mental institution is indescribable. It all commenced when a group of my companions and I resolved to investigate the chilling rumors that enshrouded the decaying structure. Unbeknownst to me, I was about to plunge headfirst into a waking nightmare. As we crossed the threshold into the asylum, the atmosphere was oppressively damp and heavy, saturated with a volatile blend of dread and fascination. Our faltering flashlights cast wavering beams, revealing the haunting, abandoned corridors. The walls bore the ominous stains of torment and despair. We pressed further into the asylum, our footsteps resonating eerily through the oppressive darkness. My heart pounded relentlessly with each groan of the ancient floorboards, and my breaths grew shallow as we neared a sinister chamber. It was within that room that I first caught wind of the bone, chilling whispers that would come to haunt my every dream. A rasping, otherworldly voice seemed to emanate from the obscurity, uttering words that were barely intelligible. It was as though the very walls themselves sought to convey their anguish. My companions and I exchanged terror-stricken glances, but our curiosity overpowered our fear, compelling us to step into the room. In the dim, wavering light of our flashlights, we stumbled upon a ragged journal resting on a corroded bed frame. I picked it up, and as I perused its contents, my dread deepened. The journal belonged to a former inmate, chronicling the unspeakably gruesome experiments conducted on the asylum's hapless residents. Suddenly, an arctic chill swept through the room, and our exhalations materialized as frosty plumes in the air. Inhuman shrieks reverberated down the corridor, and then the lights of our flashlights began to flicker and extinguish. Panic took hold as darkness smothered us. We groped desperately for an escape, but it felt like an eternity before we finally burst back into the moonlight. The asylum stood in eerie stillness, as if it had never been disturbed, but we were acutely aware that we had unearthed something malevolent hidden within its forsaken walls. To this day, I remain unable to erase the haunting memories of that accursed place, and the sinister murmurs persistently invade my slumber. The asylum looms as a ghastly testament to the malevolent forces lurking in the forgotten recesses of our world, ready to terrorize those audacious enough to delve into the unknown. Mike, an ordinary man named Michael Scott Smith, lived an unremarkable life in New York City. He was the product of Mitchell and Mary Smith, and his physical details were utterly average. His mundane existence unfolded within the confines of his modest 870-square-foot apartment on 2nd Street, where he toiled away in the world of finance, earning a meager $25 per hour. One fateful day, after finishing his daily grind, a peculiar impulse led him to consider a fortune-teller's booth across the street. Intrigued, he approached the mysterious space and was greeted by an aged Cajun woman who seemed to know more about him than he had revealed. She beckoned him to experience his fate through a deck of tarot cards. Intrigued by the unfamiliar prospect, Mike questioned the woman about the cards. She explained their function and promptly proceeded to draw 3 cards, their faces concealed. Mike watched anxiously as she unveiled the cards. Her smile twisted into a horrifying expression as she exposed them. Judgment, death, and the Hanged Man. The latter card, in particular, seemed to mock him. The woman ominously warned him that he might be fortunate to survive the next 3 days. Mike left the booth, a sense of foreboding gnawing at him. He paid the woman her fee, shrugged off her warning, and went about his life. That night, a bizarre dream haunted him, featuring the Hanged Man card, but with a gruesome twist. It portrayed him hanging in his own bedroom. The woman's words echoed around him, intensifying until they were abruptly drowned out by the blaring sirens of police and ambulances. The dream ended, but he awoke in a panic to the sound of his alarm. Mike, now late for work, rushed through his day. His boss received a hurried explanation, and the day continued as usual, but he couldn't shake the unsettling dream from his mind. After work, he returned to the fortune-teller's booth, only to find it abandoned. Inquiring at the neighboring shop, he learned of its dark history, including a customer who had died 3 days after having their fortune read, and the old woman's own heart attack. Despite his lack of superstition, Mike became consumed by the idea that he was cursed. Desperate for answers, he turned to the internet, but it was mysteriously down. Communication with the outside world was severed. That night, the recurring dream returned. This time, it led him through the steps of paramedics, attempting to revive someone, only to declare them dead. Mike then found himself in a morgue, listening to a coroner's report that eerily matched his own physical details. He awoke yet again, at 7:30, but this time he couldn't escape the looming presence of the Hanged Man card. Its silent but relentless beckoning grew louder. Overwhelmed, he sought a way to silence it forever. In a dark moment of desperation, he purchased a rope and a stepping stool from a hardware store, with a chilling plan in mind. By 9:54 that evening, he was back in his apartment, where he enacted a macabre ritual. He tied one end of the rope to his bedroom ceiling, placed the stool beneath him, and secured the other end around his neck. As the clock approached 10:15, he heard the woman's voice one final time, her words a haunting plea for mercy. And then, in a silent room, he kicked the stool from beneath him, sealing his grim fate. As he hung there, lifeless, a single card materialized in his limp hand, bearing the Hanged Man, a chilling testament to the terror that had consumed him.